Let's talk about Alexander the Great. This is a guy who was a king at 20, a conqueror by 22, and the ruler of pretty much the entire known world before he even turned 30. His name is basically synonymous with military genius. But in just over a decade of nonstop conquest, he also carved a legacy so divisive that even today, history can't quite decide if he was a hero or a monster.
And look, that is not an exaggeration. Alexander's 10-year campaign didn't just change the map, it completely redrew the course of civilization itself. But his impact, well, it's a story with two very, very different sides.
And yeah, this really says it all, doesn't it? To the Persians, whose ancient empire he completely shattered, he was known as Alexander the Accursed. But to the West, he's forever Alexander the Great. So how on earth does one guy end up with two such opposite legacies? Well, let's dig in.
Okay, so to really get Alexander, you actually have to start with his dad, King Philip II of Macedon. You see, Philip was the architect here. He's the one who basically forged the weapon that Alexander would one day wield to conquer the world.
And at the heart of this military revolution was this thing, the sarissa. Now, this wasn't just some longer spear. We're talking about an 18-foot-long pike that is double the length of a standard Greek spear. This one piece of equipment completely changed the game of ancient warfare by giving his infantry an absolutely unbeatable reach.
So how did they use it?
Well, Philip drilled his soldiers into this incredibly disciplined formation called a phalanx, 16 ranks deep. Just try to imagine facing this thing. It's a solid, moving wall of iron spear trips, literally a human porcupine that was pretty much impenetrable and, let's be honest, absolutely terrifying to any army of the day. And with this new, terrifying military machine, Philip pulls off what nobody thought was possible. He crushes the combined forces of Athens and Thebes, and for the first time he unites all these warring Greek states. And how do you keep them united? You give them a common enemy, the massive Persian Empire. The whole idea of a grand invasion, that was all Philip. But here's the twist. Philip gets assassinated before he can ever launch that invasion. So all of a sudden, his 20-year-old son, Alexander, inherits the whole shebang, the army, the plan, and a kingdom that's just itching to explode into rebellion. He's just 20 years old, and he has to prove to everyone that he's not just some kid playing dress-up in his dad's armor. And oh boy, did he prove it. After absolutely crushing the rebellions at home, Alexander picks up his father's grand plan. He launches what has to be one of the most audacious, some might say insane, military campaigns in all of history, the conquest of the Persian Empire, the undisputed superpower of the day. Think about this. He crosses into Asia with an army of only about 40,000 men. Now, that might sound like a lot, but he was ridiculously outnumbered. The Persian Empire could field armies many, many times that size. Alexander was basically betting everything on his army's superior tactics, their training, and, let's be real, his own fearless, almost crazy personal leadership. And this is where you really see his genius shine. At the decisive Battle of Gaugamela, he's facing this enormous Persian army on a wide open plain, a terrible situation for the smaller force. But instead of a direct assault, he does something brilliant, totally counterintuitive. He starts moving his flank to the right, baiting the Persians to stretch out their line. What he's really doing is trying to create a gap in their center, and the second they take that bait, bam, he leads this devastating cavalry charge right through that gap, straight for their king, Darius. And the crazy part? This tactic worked. Perfectly. And not just once, he pulls it off twice. At both of the war's most critical battles, the great Persian king Darius sees Alexander and his cavalry charging straight for him, and he turns and flees. He just bolts. And you can imagine what that does to an army's morale. It just completely collapses. But his campaign wasn't just about pure conquest. In some places, like Egypt, which had really suffered under Persian rule, he was seen as a liberator. They literally welcomed him with open arms, crowned him pharaoh, and even hailed him as a living god, the son of Amun. Now just stop and think for a second. What is being told you're God due to the ego of a 24-year-old who's already conquered half the known world? Yeah, it's a big deal. So after Darius is eventually murdered by his own men, Alexander's original mission is technically over. He's done it. He is the undisputed king of Asia. But he doesn't stop. He just keeps pushing his army further and further east. And this is the point in the story where that heroic, liberating conqueror starts to look a lot more like a paranoid tyrant. And the change is, it's swift and it's brutal. He executes one of his top generals, Philotas, and then has his father, a veteran commander, killed too, just on suspicion. He murders his close friend, Cletus, the very man who saved his life in battle, all during a drunken argument. He starts demanding that his own Macedonian soldiers perform this Persian ritual called proskynesis, which is basically prostrating yourself before him. And finally, his army, who've marched thousands of miles and fought for years, they've just had enough. They mutiny. They refuse to go one step further. And this is really the key to understanding the conflict, right? For Alexander, who's now adopting Persian customs and has been told he's a god in Egypt, demanding this kind of respect might have seemed totally normal. But for his Greek soldiers, this was complete blasphemy. You only do that for a god, not for your king and not for a man. It just created this huge cultural rift between him and the very men who had followed him to the ends of the earth. So, forced by his own men to finally turn back, Alexander makes his way back to Babylon. And he's not resting. No way. He's already planning his next massive campaign, the conquest of Arabia. But the man who had conquered the entire known world had one final enemy that he just couldn't beat. And his story, well, it ends just as suddenly as it all began. He was only 32 years old. 32! After all those battles, all those wounds, all that danger, he dies in his bed from a sudden fever. It's just unbelievable. The most powerful man in the world, undefeated on the battlefield, was just gone. And the chaos that followed was immediate and total. Alexander hadn't named a successor, so what happens? His top generals immediately start tearing the empire apart, fighting each other for the biggest pieces. His wife, Roxana, and his infant son, they're murdered in the middle of this massive power struggle. The entire vast empire, which was really only held together by his personal will, just completely shattered. But here's the thing. His true legacy wasn't the physical empire, because that didn't even survive him. His real, lasting legacy was this, the Hellenistic Age. His conquests had spread Greek language, art, and philosophy all the way across the Middle East and into Asia. And this incredible fusion of Greek and Eastern cultures created this vibrant, new world that would dominate the region for the next 300 years and would go on to deeply influence the Roman Empire that came after. So that brings us right back to where we started. Who was Alexander? Was he this brilliant conqueror, a visionary who brought different worlds together? Or was he a ruthless, paranoid tyrant who was just consumed by his own ambition? The truth is, maybe he was both. And it's that complexity, that contradiction, that makes his story, and the whole idea of what greatness even means, so absolutely fascinating.